Hi, my name is Malin, and this is my data analysis presentation for Season 3 of Criminal Minds Evolution. In this video, I'm going to talk about the crimes, criminals, and other data points for Criminal Minds Evolution, specifically Season 3, but also just so far the first 3 seasons as a whole. There's going to be spoilers for Season 3 and the other 2 seasons as well, so if you haven't seen them, come back to this video after you've watched it. I have recorded data for the first 2 seasons of Criminal Minds Evolution, and I'll link a video to that in the description. I also have videos for the first 15 seasons of Criminal Minds, which you might hear me refer to as the original run or original series, and I'll link a video to that as well in the description. But let's get started. Okay, I want to start by talking about the data collection process. So what I did was I watched each episode recording data on the first watch through. It can be a little tougher to record data on the first watch through, but I'm a very impatient person and I don't have time to rewatch it. I recorded the following data points for each episode. The IMDb rating taken about 1 week after airing, and just prior to this slideshow, well, it was actually yesterday. This is attempt 3 recording this. The crimes based on a list defined after analyzing some other shows. The cause of death, or COD as I'll often abbreviate it, which is also based on a list defined after analyzing other shows. The criminals, which is just the name of the person responsible for each crime. The number of non-murder victims, which is the number of victims who did not die as a result of that crime. The number of male and female murder victims. Only on-screen deaths are counted, and on-screen deaths is something I use in a lot of the shows I record data for, and it did lead to some difficulties this season, which I'll get into later. I say a death is on screen if I either see a murder actively occur, see someone who's clearly about to die, but maybe it cuts away. Sometimes shows will cut away like at the moment of an impact. If I see a body at a crime scene after a crime has already occurred, or I see a body in the morgue after it's maybe been removed from the crime scene. Crime scene photos pinned up on a board do not count. I also recorded the state, which is the location a crime occurs at, and is only recorded once per episode. So there can be multiple states in an episode, but it's by episode count, not by crime count. The opening and closing quote, which is the name of the character who reads the quote. Criminal deaths, which is recorded only if the criminal dies. It doesn't matter if they committed a crime in that episode, as long as they were previously recorded as committing a crime. Criminal arrests, recorded only if the criminal is arrested. Same thing as with deaths. And last victim, which is whether or not the last victim survives, which is usually in evolution pretty easy to figure out, but I also made a flow chart to help explain it, and I'll show that when I talk about it. Additionally, some crimes do have gray areas or are not recorded. So criminals murdered by the FBI are always noted, but are not counted in crime graphs. And for this show, flashbacks always count. Before diving into the data, I want to share some observations. So first of all, like many crime shows, they'll usually have a little text in the lower third telling you what state or city they're in right now. But sometimes on this show they don't, and the characters will just say a town name, which usually means it's a local crime. And I don't like when they do this because then I have to look up where it is because I'm not local to DC. And this actually happened quite a few times this season. Additionally, they are continuing the trend of no closing quotes, and the episode Collateral, Season 3, Episode 9, had no quotes at all. It's not the first episode to have no quotes, but it's the only one this season. 2 episodes this season had no crimes at all. Time to Say Goodbye, Season 3, Episode 3, and Tara, Season 3, Episode 8. The first one is Will's funeral, and the second one is where Tara's having like a coma dream kind of thing. I also noticed that they keep trying to appeal to Gen Z and Gen Alpha, like with young people slang and doing the floss dance. And honestly, I really just noticed that because it's cringy every time. All right, time to talk about the crimes and the criminals. For the shows I record data for, I've kind of stuck to this hierarchy, where if a victim dies as a result of a crime, it is always murder, and a crime in the hierarchy can imply crimes below it, so a murder can imply an abduction. Additionally, crimes on the same level can't be recorded together, so I'm not going to record mayhem and attempted murder. The crimes I recorded for Evolution were murder, kidnapping, abduction, explosion, mayhem, other, and attempted murder, and that's across all 3 seasons so far. The causes of deaths I've recorded for Evolution are shooting, stabbing, dog, other, unknown, poisoning, bludgeoning, explosion, drowning, and asphyxiation. Additionally, I had defined stabbing as being any sharp instrument, which is not just limited to a knife, but could include the sharp end of an axe or even a piece of glass. Other is something that I don't necessarily know where else to put it. There were a couple crimes this season that were definitely legal, but I didn't record, so fighting or assaults that don't reach mayhem levels, any sort of thing like abetting by calling someone or by hiding information, as well as mailing a child. I obviously recorded kidnapping, but mailing a child does seem also illegal, but I didn't record it as a crime. This is the crime graph for season 3. This is so far the deadliest season with 23 murders. However, this is also the season with the least diverse crimes. Of the 7 categories that have appeared in Evolution, only 4 of them happened this season, with mostly murders and abductions, but a couple of attempted murders and 1 kidnapping. And yeah, there were quite a few abductions this season and 1 kidnapping, the difference being that kidnapping means the victim was under 18. Of the 5 attempted murders this season, the methods were by drowning, alive burial, and shooting. This is the crime graph for all 3 seasons of Evolution. There have been just over 60 murders, quite a few abductions, quite a few attempted murders, and just a handful of kidnappings, explosions, mayhems, and others. Some victims may be counted twice if they were the victim of multiple attacks in different episodes. There's actually only been one thing that I had to put under other, and that was dog murder. I always record murder of animals, but it's not a human, so I don't record it as a murder. I always just put it under other. Also, among all the shows I've recorded data for, it's only ever been dogs. The 2 mayhems that have appeared on this show were actually both in season 2, so season 1 and 3 have had no mayhems, and those were eye mutilation and torture shooting. This is the cause of death graph for season 3, and as I mentioned, this was only for on-screen murder victims, and most of them were either killed by a gun or by some sharp instrument. I like to categorize shows in my head as being either shooty or stabby, and so this season was fairly shooty. There were just a couple more gun deaths than shooting deaths, but it was still the majority. There was also a bludgeoning, which was done by Elias with his bare hands rather than an actual, weapon, and the explosion was actually small internal bombs that may or may not have included spiders. And also the drowning category is new. There hasn't been a drowning in Evolution yet until now. There were certainly some in the original Criminal Minds, but I wasn't recording causes of death then. The 2 others for murder that occurred this season was a burial alive and spider condoms. There was actually quite a bit of diversity in terms of the cause of deaths for season 3, but looking at all of the seasons, we see it's still mostly either gun or stabbing, with quite a few others and quite a few asphyxiations as well. Additionally, there is dog. I don't know why it has its own category. It really belongs under other. And Shooty vs. Stabby is pretty close, but I think it's fair to say Criminal Minds Evolution is a shooty show. The others across all 3 seasons are Blood Loss from Biting, Cat of Nine Tails Whip, which was actually 2 deaths, and those are both in season 1, Acid, which was a season 2 episode, and Burial Alive, and Spider Condoms, which were from season 3. I also want to take a look at all of the criminals that committed crimes in season 3 by looking at their previous possible victims, the victims we saw them kill on screen, as well as their fates. The first criminal this season was Franklin Fowler, who ended up committing suicide. He was previously stated to have killed 3 men and 1 woman. We then saw him drown 1 man in his pool, shoot a man, and attempt to drown 2 women in his pool. They were the last victims and they lived. The next criminal was Clyde Smets, who also committed suicide. He was said to have possibly killed 2 women previously, but they didn't seem very certain about that. He also killed 1 woman and abducted 1 woman. But she was the last victim, so she lived. Brad Falco ended up murdered. He was possibly responsible for killing 1 woman, but then in the show he did kill 2 more. He worked with Malcolm Ramsey, who also was murdered, and he assisted Brad Falco. He also shot Brad Falco and abducted a woman on his own, and she was the last victim. Ariel Ramsey was Malcolm Ramsey's daughter. She just kind of died after stabbing her father and presumably killing him. Ronald Graber ended up arrested. He was stated to have previously stabbed 3, a mom, a dad, and a son, leaving the daughter alive. We then saw him at the start of the episode. He stabbed 3, 2 daughters and a dad, leaving the mom alive. Then at the end of the episode, he had 4 members of a family tied up. This was not recorded as they were not abducted or anything, but they are the last victims as they all survived. Kyle Mackey also ended up arrested. He buried 1 woman alive, abducted 1 woman, who was his wife, and then he attempted to bury his daughter alive. She was the last victim and she lived. Got a couple more. Tessa LeBrun ended up arrested. She was kind of the big bad this season. She was the disciple. I am making some assumptions as I believe she was responsible for the spider-related deaths. They also stated that they believe she was possible for taking 11 men. The BAU never explicitly said killed. They just said she took them. But I think it's fair to say she probably killed those 11 men. On screen, assuming she was responsible for the spider deaths, she killed 1 man with a condom full of spiders that he choked on, and she killed another man with a balloon of explosives. Then, at the end of season 3, episode 9, there's a shooting at a hospital, and they never explicitly said who was responsible for it, but I think it's fair to say it was either directly or indirectly Tessa. I'm going for directly because she abducted Elias and Ochoa at the end. I believe she shot 6 men and shot 1 woman. I put 3 confirmed and 1 confirmed because those were the ones that I could see in close-ups. This is a shot I took of my TV as I was watching, and I labeled where I was getting the victims from. There's a man down here. I think he's shown a little bit later. There's two men over here. They have a close-up later. This is a man. This is a man. And I believe there's a man along this wall who also had a close-up later. And the woman was shown sitting at this desk in at the start of the next episode, and then Voight and Ochoa were abducted. And as I just said, Voight and Ochoa were abducted at the end of that episode. They are the last victims. That was a cliffhanger. She also held Voight and Ochoa for that last episode, and they both lived, so they were the last victims. Trevor Woolner and Steve Morris were arrested and then committed suicide. If these names don't sound familiar, that's because their names were revealed like an episode or two after they were arrested. I originally had them written down as Man Bun and Associate, if that helps you remember who they are. They were arrested driving the truck that had these 7 abducted men inside, as well as the lawyer that had been shot. Robert Kinney ended up murdered. He shot 2 people, Evan and Tara. They both survived, and they were the last victims. That was also a cliffhanger. And then in the episode after Evan and Tara got shot, the episode Tara, the thing that annoyed me about this episode is that there were 2 murders that were not shown on screen, and it was never explicitly explained who killed them, although likely it was someone relating back to Tessa LeBrun, but they never showed it on screen. It was just the characters are like in that little room with the circular table, and I think Alves pulls up on his phone a picture of Robert Kinney shot in the head and just says, "Oh, look, Robert Kinney's dead," and he just turns his phone around and shows the picture. And they never go to a crime scene, they never go to a morgue, we never see his dead body, so I can't record it as a murder without breaking my own consistency and my rules. So anyway, an unknown offender shot Robert Kinney off screen and shot Voight's lawyer off screen. So there's 2 murders that I couldn't record because they were both off screen and also were committed by an unknown person. Finally, John Perry with the nurse ended up murdered. He shot a woman and kidnapped her son. The woman obviously died, but the boy lived. Now, throughout the 3 seasons of Evolution, Elias Voight has been a main character and a main criminal. My season 1 and season 2 video, I traced out his victims thus far, but it's expanded a little since then. So I'm going to go through it again and build on it. In season 1, in the opening scene, we see Elias killing a man in 2005. This is counted in my data, but he is also included in the Yakima shipping container counts. In episode 1, the FBI says they have 16 victims in the container, but in episode 2, it's up to 24, not including Bones, which implies more. In episode 3, Elias kills a man inside the second shipping container. In episode 5, he kills a dog and Benjamin Reeves. The second container is found in episode 6, and Elias kills his uncle Cyrus. In episode 8, Elias tells a victim he has killed 61 people fairly early in the episode. And later in that episode, Rossi tells Elias that he has killed 52 people. So at this point, the FBI only knows about the 27 in the first container, the 23 in the second, Benjamin Reeves, and Cyrus. And so this does add up to 52. So Rossi is exact from what the FBI knows. He's not lying to Elias. And while it's implied that Elias killed his parents, it's also kind of unknown at this point. And there are still 9 extra victims. And finally, Elias kills Bailey in episode 10. If you want to hear more about who is in Elias' shipping container, I go into that a little more in depth in my other video. Elias was in every episode of season 1, but in season 2, he's not in episode 3, and in episode 6, Rossi tells Elias that he has killed 60 people. It's possible Rossi was rounding, but Elias corrects him and says 62, which is accurate due to the prior 61 in Bailey, though 9 of those victims still remain unknown. So Rossi was maybe recounting what Elias told the victim with some inaccuracy. He was saying 60, including himself, victims that he doesn't know about, so hence why he could be rounding or have some inaccuracy. Elias also does not appear in episode 8 of this season, and in episode 10, it ends with Elias throwing bleach in a man's face, and then he is stabbed, and this was the cliffhanger. I don't remember what I originally wrote down when season 2 aired, but I definitely had to change it when season 3 came out, because season 3, it is revealed that at the season 2 finale, Elias killed the 2 prisoners, and they did shank him, but this brings Elias' total to 64. In episode 5, Elias reveals that he killed Ronald Graber's family, his mom, dad, and sister, in Ohio in 2007. But it's pretty unlikely that they're in the shipping container in Washington, keeping his total at 64. These do account for 3 of the unknown 9 victims, so the writers might be covering their tracks a little bit because in season 1 they did clearly place Elias with 9 extra victims. However, they do also just start straight up saying that Elias killed his parents, so I'm going to add another 2 to the 9 since it does seem fairly certain at this point that he did. This leaves only 4 unknown, so maybe he killed another family somewhere. Additionally, Tessa cast doubt on whether maybe it was Cyrus who set the fire that killed Elias' parents, but she seems to have some sort of weird connection with him, like maybe Stockholm Syndrome, some sort of issue like that. So I don't think we can really trust her account of that. Finally, Elias kills John Perry in season 3, episode 10, bringing his total number of victims to 65. These are all of the criminals that have appeared throughout Evolution. Most of them do just appear in one episode, and if they're working for Elias or Tessa LeBrun, they tended to just kill themselves at the end, so they really could only appear in one episode. However, the ones with the most victims were in multiple episodes, or were connected to larger criminals. Now on this graph, I have the darker color. The red is their number of murder victims, and the green color on top is the number of other victims who maybe survived. And so the criminals with the most victims are the ones that were in multiple episodes, or the ones that were connected to larger criminals. So Damian Booth and Dana Howe both worked with Jade Waters, who has a very high bar, and they were in season 2. And in season 3, Tessa LeBrun has the second highest bar of all, and Trevor Woolner and Steve Morris, who were two of the masked people who worked with her, also have a very high bar. However, they mostly just responsible for holding 7 men captive. Elias, the main criminal of this series, has 8 murder victims on screen and 8 other victims on screen. This is the gender of all the criminals. As you can see, it's far majority male with 26 men and 4 women. And this is how it is with most shows. Every show I've collected data for has had a majority male. In fact, season 1 was all men, which is how I was able to predict in season 2 the we're looking for a woman plot twist. I should have predicted season 3 would be a woman too, because it was kind of the same thing happening. But this also leads me to the question that now that there have been 2 female crime leaders, will season 4 also have a female crime leader? Now, I can compare the gender of the criminals in Evolution to the original Criminal Minds in that this is a very similar ratio. This is 86.6% male, and the original Criminal Minds, according to my own data, had about 85 or 86% of the criminals were male. Now I want to move on to the victims of these crimes, starting with the victim gender. So there were 15 men and 8 women murdered in season 3, and this is a 2/3 split. To compare, season 2 had 3/4 were men, and season 1 had 3/5 were men. There are 10 criminal deaths in season 3 that are not included here because they were killed by the FBI. And there are also 2 off-screen criminal murders that I already talked about who are also not included here. All of these criminal deaths are men except for 1, I believe. Looking at the gender ratio for all 3 seasons of Criminal Minds, we see a very similar ratio. And this is something I've seen in every show I've recorded data for except for Fargo, which has a weird format. But it is always a 2/3 split in gender, and that the majority gender will be about 2/3 and the minority gender will be about 1/3. And it's not always exact, but 20 to 42, that's very close. And so this show does lean male. A couple shows lean female. I have noticed that a show like this one and Dexter are the ones that lean male, where it's more focused on criminals themselves, whereas another show that maybe focuses on solving the crimes or focusing on the victims might be majority female. Now, I did mention there are a couple on-screen deaths that aren't included in most of my graphs, so I did want to make an all on-screen deaths in Criminal Minds Evolution graph. So this graph includes anyone that we saw die, and this also includes criminals shot by the BAU. So far there have been 61 murders, 5 FBI murders, meaning that when finally finding a criminal, the FBI shot them and killed them. There were also 6 suicides, 5 of which were at the instruction of Voight or Tessa, and 1 was just a different suicide. And there are also 2 non-crime deaths. Both of the non-crime deaths are in season 3, one of which was Ariel Ramsey, who just kind of dies. She has some sort of immune system disease, and so she just kind of dies. And the other one is Will, who had an aneurysm and also just kind of died. This is a flowchart I made back a couple years ago when I recorded data for the original Criminal Minds, and I just made it to explain my thought process for how to decide whether or not the last victim lived. And it is usually fairly clear in Evolution, but the thing that might not be clear is NA, which stands for not applicable and means that the killer from the episode threatens someone, usually a main character, and then the episode just kind of ends before we really find out what happened to them. However, every episode in the original Criminal Minds had a crime, but some episodes in Evolution have no crimes at all, and those are also recorded as NA because there's just no crime for someone to be the last victim of. So overall, there have been 16 last victims who survived, 5 who didn't, and 9 episodes were not applicable. So most of the last victims do survive. The FBI gets it there in time to save them. 3 of the NAs are episodes that had no crimes at all, 2 of which were in season 3. There are about a third of the NAs are just from episodes with no crimes, and the remaining 6 are cliffhangers. And as for the yes and no, about a quarter of them are no. It's usually just someone died earlier in the episode and it wasn't like the very end. So in season 3, all of the victims survived except for 2 cliffhanger episodes and 1 episode with no crimes at all. If you're curious, the 5 no's that have happened are when Voight made a dog kill a man, when Voight killed Cyrus, a guy in season 2 episode 1 who was a last-minute death, someone Jade killed, and when Jade killed Damien in season 2. Next, onto the locations of this series. Honestly, the graph isn't all that interesting yet. The original run of Criminal Minds had a much more interesting graph because it was like over 300 episodes. And this is by episode count, not by crime count, because sometimes if someone's killing in like the DC area, they don't necessarily tell you exactly which part they're dying in. But yeah, the most common states are Virginia, DC, Maryland, and Washington. Season 3 did mention that most cases were local, and all of them were in either Virginia, DC, or Maryland, except for 3, which was 1 in Ohio, 1 in Arizona, and 1 in North Carolina. And to me, the DC area, what I would think of as being local to the BAU is DC, Virginia, and Maryland, all of which are right over here. It's too small to see, but the count for DC is 5. And there's also 1 unknown location because the prison where Voight was attacked at the very, very end of season 2 was not specified. Additionally, Washington is also one of the most common states, and that's just high because that's where Elias Voight lived in season 1. All 5 Washington episodes were in season 1. Next, I want to look at the ratings of episodes. So these are the ratings out of 10 taken from IMDb. This scale just goes from 5 to 10, but it really goes from 0 to 10. And you can see looking at it how it kind of changes with each season. It has only been just over a week since season 3 aired, so it could change a little more as time goes on, but with season 4, I'll update this graph again. But season 3 has the second highest rated 8.2 and the 2 lowest rated 6.8 and 5.5 episodes of Evolution, and the least consistent ratings are in season 3. You can see it jumps around the most. I also noticed that all 3 seasons have a slightly lower finale, with season 3's finale being much lower. And you can just visually see how much the consistency of the episodes changed with each coming season. I also want to look at an 18 season comparison across all of seasons of Criminal Minds. So we have the first 15 seasons, the original run, and then 16, 17, and 18 are seasons 1, 2, and 3 of Evolution. And so season 18 is now the lowest rated season. It averaged a 7.25 with a standard deviation of 0.74, which is the highest when you want a low standard deviation. And season 18 also has the new lowest rated episode. However, as I mentioned, these ratings could still change a bit in the coming time. 3 years ago, when I first recorded data for the original run, the lowest rated episode was actually a 5.9, but it's since gone up to a 6.6, and that's a pretty sizable difference. But the first 2 seasons of Evolution actually had the lowest standard deviation, 0.19 and 0.25, compared to the lowest in the original run, which was 0.33. And this might just be attributable to the different format that Evolution has, where all 10 episodes are one story, where it depends more on the quality of that one story, as opposed to like these seasons, which are just 20 or so different episodes with different stories and different qualities. The previous lowest rated season was season 12, which now has an average of 7.40, and the previous highest standard deviation was season 11, which had a standard deviation of 0.59. I do want to mention that season 11 has for the original run the lowest rated episode and the second highest rated, which is why it has a high standard deviation. And so overall, the early seasons of Criminal Minds are the highest rated. Seasons 2 and 4 are tied at 7.96, but I think if you add a couple decimals, season 4 is slightly higher. Season 3 is not that far behind, but season 1 of Criminal Minds Evolution, or season 16, actually has the third highest average at 7.94. It's just behind seasons 2 and 4. I do wonder if these lower ratings in season 3, I wonder what the impact it could have on season 4 is, as if a lot of people were maybe dissatisfied by the ending, as I found it personally to be pretty anticlimactic. If maybe some people won't come back to watch season 4, and if that could affect, I guess viewing numbers, but also the ratings from IMDb itself. Finally, I want to look at the quotes, as I feel like this is kind of a trademark of Criminal Minds. Episodes have a quote at the start, and they used to have quotes at the end. So specifically for Evolution, these are the number of quotes each character has said. Only two episodes have had end quotes, and both of them were in season one. They've kind of done away with it by now. However, in the original run, almost every episode had a start and an end quote. The episodes have had no quotes at all, and this isn't a thing unique to Evolution. I think there were maybe like five or six in the original run that had no quotes. Also, Elias, who is a criminal, is a very frequent quoter. He's tied with Rossi at 7. Prentice isn't far behind at 5, and then there's a couple other characters that have had quotes as well. Tyler had his first quote this season. I think it's interesting that Elias has so many quotes when in the original run, I believe the only criminals who ever quoted were Ian Doyle on maybe one or two occasions and the chameleon guy towards the end of the show. This is an 18 season comparison of all the quotes. So Rossi and Hotch were kind of like the big in charge guys, and I think that's why they quoted a lot more. They were maybe a little more in charge of the unit. And while Hotch is the highest, he's not in evolution, so Rossi's slowly gaining on him with evolution quotes. Prentice also kind of became a little bit in charge after Hotch left. I'm still not quite sure where Rossi stands on being in charge. I think Prentice is officially in charge, and so she also has quite a few quotes with a couple more in evolution. She was gone a lot though from the original. She just came in what, season 2, and then she left for a bit, and then she came back, and she had a couple cameos. But yeah, she was gone a bit. Reed was in a lot of the first 15 seasons, but he also missed a couple episodes and he hasn't been in Evolution. And the other things worth noting are that Luke Alves might be the character with the most episodes, but with the least quotes. He's been here since the start of season 12, which at this point is 6 seasons, although the last couple have been shorter in number of episodes. But he's only done one quote in Evolution and maybe around 10 in the original run. Compare that to Blake, who was there for only 2 seasons, and she has just a little bit fewer. Garcia was in all but one episode throughout the entire series. In 18 seasons, there was one season 1 episode that she was not in. I do think the fact that she has fewer quotes is related to the fact that she's not a profiler in the field, and so she does tend to quote when the episode relates more to her. And finally, I mentioned Tyler had his first quote in season 3, and he's been here probably about as long as Elle with the same number of quotes. They're both just at 1, but obviously Tyler's still here and Elle is long gone. And that's the end of my Criminal Minds Evolution Season 3 slideshow. I hope you enjoyed watching, and if you want to see more Criminal Minds data analysis videos, I'll link them in the description, and subscribe so that in the hope Season 4 comes out, you can see my video for that too.